Hannah Jane Pritchett, current U of A GIST Master's student. Welcome to the University of Arizona GIST podcast. Our hosts are Jennifer Mason and Yoga Korgaukar. Today, we will be talking with Maree Archuleta, a GIS analyst in the Planning, Design, and Construction Department at the U of A. Let's get started.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another University of Arizona GIST podcast. I am an assistant professor in the department. My name is Jennifer Mason, or Jenny Mason, and we also have Yoga Korgaukar here, who is also an assistant professor of practice here in the GIST program. And we have Maree Archuleta here, who is a GIS analyst in the Planning, Design, and Construction Department at U of A. Maree, can you tell us what that means to be a GIS analyst in the Planning, Design, and Construction Department?
Yeah, well, I honestly, when I applied for the job, I wasn't sure because I saw that it was through Planning, Design, and Construction, and through the interview process, I learned that really what the GIS analyst does in the Department of Planning, Design, and Construction is GIS for the university. We basically handle all of the campus maps, the visitor maps, and all of our data surrounds features on campus. So a lot of it is following projects to make sure that we get all of the GIS data from them so that then I can properly put in new buildings around campus so that the GIS is totally up to date. And a lot of it also surrounds supporting other departments that don't have any sort of GIS resources. So lately we've been doing a lot of work with parking and transportation to get some apps going for them. We work with FM sometimes. It's really kind of just doing all things GIS related to the physical university.
So Maree, what does a typical day look like for you while working?
Well, I guess I kind of split my time between basic data editing, which our team kind of all participates in. We do have a lot of data maintenance that we upkeep. And then sometimes I'll work on some stuff on ArcGIS Online. We like to kind of have a good profile of online resources, so I'll tend to investigate a lot of options that we have with the data that can be displayed with those resources. I also will spend a lot of time working on documentation. We try to be pretty diligent about making sure that we know exactly what our feature classes function as. Sometimes I'll also be creating new feature classes and making sure the data structure makes sense for whatever we're trying to present.
So backing up, I know that you graduated from the program, I think you said in 2015. I'm curious, pretty much everyone I meet doesn't really know what GIS is until they somehow discover it randomly. And I'm curious how you found the field of GIS and, kind of happened into the program here.
Yeah, so I obviously had no idea what GIS was for a while. I started off my undergraduate career as a musician, but I knew that I also wanted to major in something else too, just in case, as a lot of people tend to have doubts with music. My dad is a geographer. He's a human and cultural geographer, so he has a very different, I think, take on geography as opposed to what I have now. But he had told me about GIS and I kind of just blew it off. I was like, oh, sure, whatever. But I ended up just starting a geography major just to kind of see what it would lead me towards, thinking I would do something more about water and the environment. But I took an intro class and they were talking about habitat modeling with GIS. And I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. So I took the intro level GIS class and then switched my concentration to the GIS concentration for my undergraduate degree. And during that I had a couple classes with Dr. Gary Christofferson, who I overheard talking about the one-year master's program. And I felt like, well, I'm already here. I should just go ahead and jump into it. It's only a year, I can do it. So that's kind of how I then fell into the GIST program.
So do you think that the GIST program gave you all the skills that you needed for this particular job, or did you have to learn something on the job as well?
I think like every single like GIS career, at least that I've been in, has been so like specific to that location that there is a lot of stuff that I didn't learn about what they're doing from my education. But I think what the GIST program prepared me for was being able to bring in more innovation to those places. So my first job out of undergrad while I was doing my master's program was with the city of Casa Grande. And it was like very basic, like data editing, just like, you know, mapping like manholes and really basic stuff. And they had some applications that our department made, but it wasn't like everyone was using GIS. There weren't many people that were housing data within it. And things that I learned in the GIST program, I think, were able to help me bring in more things to that job.
What do you feel like were some of the most important skills from the program, and maybe some new skills kind of going forward that helped you, I guess, in your day-to-day job tasks with the type of job that you do? Hard skills and soft skills. Sometimes when we ask people this question, people are like critical thinking because, you know, sometimes we don't know how to do something, but being able to research it. And sometimes it's things like you've kind of alluded to, like database management, you know, and like some of these kind of overarching skills that are really important for you.
Yeah, I think what the GIST program kind of brought to the table with what I do in my job is kind of making things a little more streamlined in a sense. So there are a lot of tools that, you know, the software is so extensive and you don't learn half of it by just doing what you do every day. And I think that the program really kind of opened up doors to learning about a bunch of different ways you can approach one problem, and to be able to solve it better, faster, which then enabled me to do more. So things like programming, you know, basic Python tasks that could take something that used to take me like a couple hours to knock out once a month with like a data update, I could have run automated. And it took me a week to write it because I wasn't proficient in it, but I had enough training that I could work it out. So something like that, then that kind of like opens up the doors for more creative exploration of things that I had heard about in the program, briefly worked with, that I could then bring to the table at my job.
So switching directions a little bit, we hear a lot about teamwork. Do you think teamwork applies to you in your job as well, or in your previous job at Casa Grande?
Yeah, so the team that I'm working in now is 4 of us. So it's my boss, Grant McCormick, who's our GIS manager, me, our other GIS data analyst, James Wadsworth, who also graduated from the program, and then our GIS developer, Naveed Ahmed, who also graduated from the program. So we function as a team. We could not do what we did with the Enterprise Gis at the university without that team. Grant really has worked for a long time trying to advocate for it and built this team so that it can function the way that it does. It's we depend on each other. So though I might be like the senior analyst I work with James all the time. We go back and forth on stuff, and then we can then take these ideas, and Naveed helps us shape them into apps and works through some of the problems that we can see with the data. So it's very team driven.
Oh, and since you mentioned apps and you mentioned that you were working with parking and transportation, is there anything we can look forward to that you're working on right now?
Yeah, so we actually, earlier in the spring, we finished working on our app with parking and transportation. It's called You Arrive. It's their map-based app to navigate around campus in terms of finding different parking options, bike parking, the CAT-Trans system. It has all these different GIS features that we already had in the system that then we just took over the last couple of years and perfected the data, designed the app for them, and worked really closely with them to get this data in a format that could be presented to the public so that they didn't have to rely on these like static Illustrator maps that they were creating every year. It would be a constant data source that people could see no matter what. It would be ever changing with the data. So on the other hand of that, we made a separate app that is internal to PTS to give non-GIS like proficient users the ability to edit the data. So they're the people who are very knowledgeable about the data, but not necessarily knowledgeable on the GIS side. So we made this app so that they could then update the data, and then on the next day it would appear and You Arrive.
So I'm wondering, I guess I don't know if you're using Esri, are you using Esri products? Okay. So in a way you have some flexibility when you design these apps, like the look and feel somewhat. I was just curious because, you know, you guys, you're doing kind of everything in GIS. You're on the database side, data creation, editing. You're on the side of creating apps, you know, doing some analysis, but also user experience, you know, trying to design something that's useful for people who are going to use this who might not have a GIS background. So it can't be complicated for them to use. And I guess I'm just wondering, is there any, do you guys use research to like inform how you design things or create things? Or, you know, maybe it's your training in the GIS program. And I guess part of it is, I remember, this wasn't my background, but people out of Penn State, for instance, looking at how people navigate indoors, you know, and how we can design maps to help them better navigate. And I say that because I remember having a map once on a campus. I can't remember where, but it was an app that was deployed and it was supposed to be user-friendly, really easy, but you couldn't change the orientation. So the problem was the map was always north up, and I would have to mentally rotate in my head, I'm not facing north anymore, and I would have to flip my phone around to figure out which way to go to get from A to B, because it wasn't the direction that you were facing, if that makes sense. So I don't know how much control you guys have when you're developing, you know, like user-friendly apps and thinking about the users or doing research on that end.
Yeah, so we did a good amount of research into what other universities were doing with any sort of parking and transportation data that they were presenting while we were kind of in the first phases of developing this app. Really, we couldn't find anything that matched the level of user friendliness that we were trying to achieve. We wanted to essentially make something that was familiar to people who use something like Google Maps, but really just streamlined for parking and transportation on the U of A campus. We didn't want it to be like this huge, unwieldy GIS centric app. You know, the GIS is what serves it and enabled it to happen, but we didn't want people to like see it as a technical thing. So it took a lot of research into what we wanted to exactly have the UI design be. Thankfully, Naveed is like amazing at taking our ideas to the actual app itself. So we weren't using like out of the box Esri products, but obviously the backbone of it was Esri. But Naveed designed a totally custom version of our app based on mock-ups that I would create. It was like a year of like going back and forth of, this is what I want it to look like. Okay, this is what it looks like now. Okay, wait, no, I changed my mind. And it was, we've gone back and forth a lot of how to make the user experience as best we can with what we have. So yeah, it definitely took a lot of research. We opened up the app to a lot of people in its beta stage, like just sending it to our colleagues and kind of, I think we sent it to like an anonymous like student list to get some feedback. And we would take that feedback and then reflect things in the app. We did some like extra testing too, where I think it was at the end of 2019, I think it was, we took iPads out to the U of A mall, and we like our parking contact is their marketing person, so she brought a bunch of like water bottles and swag to like entice people to come test out the app and give us feedback. So we got a lot of feedback that way too. So yeah, the testing is extensive too, because you think it's all good and then someone else finds the one issue, and then you have to kind of backtrack and figure out what to do.
I'm curious if this, what do you call, you're calling it the Enterprise GIS, right, for campus. Is this kind of the backbone, or are you guys working with like the Data Science Institute for the contact tracing on campus for COVID at all, or is it just kind of the main database? I was just curious,
it's the main. Yeah, I'm not sure how much we've been involved in the contact tracing side of it. I know that we want to be a part of it if we are asked to. But so the Enterprise GIS is what houses all of our data. It's what we refer to our team as. It's comprised of both our data and our apps and our team. So it's kind of merged into one. But our Enterprise GIS database is what houses all of the GIS data we manage for campus.
I also have a question too, because you mentioned that project. Are there, looking back at your GIS career, like memorable projects that you worked on, whether at U of A, or your previous job? And I'd love to hear, what specific kinds of GIS skills you applied or what you did for these memorable projects that you worked on.
Well, I think here at the U of A, it's definitely the U Arrive project has been like the biggest one I've tackled. I was kind of the de facto lead on it, because I was working closely with getting the data fixed and then designing the like first versions of the app. Even though we all worked on it, I kind of took the lead on it. So that's probably my most memorable one here. At my old job, it was kind of like more data management, mundane stuff, but a project, what ended up being my master's project, is kind of like the biggest takeaway I had at that job, because I used that job to help me with my master's project, which was a comparison of perception of street pavement conditions to what the actual pavement condition index was telling our public works department they were. So I did a combination of like hard data about the street conditions based on like how many lanes they have, how much traffic goes over them, what the speed limit is, how many different variables contribute to the potential of that street's pavement condition, versus what people in the city thought that each street was. So I had it was like a public GIS sort of thing where I handed out maps to people in the city saying like, can you rank all of these streets what you think they are? Can you circle the worst part of town? And so I took that and compared it to the actual data for my master's project. And I think that that's the sort of thing that then, because I stayed there for, I think it was 2 years after my master's was done, stuff like that I think really made inroads with people who'd never considered GIS a thing at that in the city government, but now they were looking at it as something that can be used so much more than just like saying where manholes were. So.
Okay, switching directions again. We have a lot of students who might listen and watch this podcast. Do you have any advice for them on what they should be focusing on in terms of pursuing a GIS career or something like that?
So I think the especially what I didn't focus on a lot until I realized I should have was the programming side of it. I think there has been a lot of changes though, at least from what I can see in terms of what's being taught in the program. And even for the undergraduate program, it's it's something that never crossed my mind as an undergrad to like look into learning how to program, and it only came about during my master's. So I think that focusing a little more on that, because it is such a big part of GIS now.
I'll add a quick disclaimer for whoever's watching. I may be teaching the programming classes, but I did not pay Maree to say that.
It really, it's something that I never even thought I would ever do. I went into GIS because I liked being able to make things happen in the program and see, the results of my hard work being put into like getting results and making a nice map. And I never thought I would get into programming. And then little did I know that it made such a huge difference for me. Not even that it's the focus of what I do, but it allowed me to free up my resources to then focus on things that I wanted to work on besides like the simple data copying and things like that. I think probably something to also focus on is just how you can take little requests and use things like ArcGIS Online to then take the data to the next level. Like sometimes you don't have the time or energy to create a really fantastic looking map for someone, but being able to be like, oh, hey, I can throw this data up for you into this web app, really quickly, and then you can use it however you need to, I think is something that is really resourceful. A lot of the times being able to discern how to take data and form it into something that someone wants is a huge skill necessary in this field, because sometimes people don't know exactly what they want out of a map or map product, and being able to take a step back and look at the data that you have and make decisions that can then lead to a great map product is something that's really important. I know there are plenty of times where people would ask for all these things, and you kind of have to be like, oh, well, what if we transformed it into something else, because I don't think it's going to look the best on this static map, but maybe since you are asking for so many features, we could do a more interactive format. So stuff like that I think is really helpful to know.
I'm curious, we heard about kind of the skills that you've learned that have been important for you, which, by the way, yoga didn't even have to add a disclaimer. This is a common trend that I've heard in all of the podcasts. When we ask people this, they're like, either we hear networking, staying connected with people that helps you get these jobs. Database organization is massive, and almost everyone has mentioned programming. So Yoga can be happy because he's going to be helping our future generation of GIS grads getting those skills. But, one of the other things I'm curious about, are there things that, if you could start all over again, you would have done differently?
Yeah, I think if I had the foresight to know that I would need programming, I might have done like a minor in my undergraduate career, just so that I had a better understanding of it all. I think even now I have the understanding of it within GIS and like for the specific pinpoints where I need it. But I think having a better overall sense of it would have helped me then to transition it to GIS. I think focusing more on the data structure, database management side of it during my education, I think would have helped me a lot, because it is a big part of what I do now, is like all the little, details in the background of setting up database schemas and the little settings that you have to perfect, and then, how to make sure that your data makes sense with all the fields that you're setting up. Like, is it redundant to have 4 different feature classes that are essentially one thing but with different data, as opposed to one feature class and 3 tables that then you can join it to depending on your purpose? I think things like that I learned a lot on the job from trial and error, but focusing more on it, my education probably would have helped me out a lot sooner.
I just want to make a quick comment on that. I came on the opposite side of things. I came from a programming background, and then I came into GIS. So I was trying to find things where I could put programming into, and that's how I came into GIS. So it's been exciting for me. Yeah. And for those who can't take classes, there's always ways that you can learn on yourself, on by yourself. There are resources online. If you want to work with a specific programming language with GIS, always look at Python. It's easy to learn. It's fairly easy to pick up and start doing things with it. So that would be my suggestion.
So I'm curious because working in your department, you're going to have to work in kind of 3D. You know, we have different floors to the buildings, and that may be very different than what a lot of students are used to. Kind of just, I don't know that many students get the like indoor experience of having multiple floors and irregularly shaped buildings with multiple floors where they may be very different from floor to floor. So I'm curious, you know, what the learning curve for that was, or if you had to do a lot of training in order to work, you know, in this indoor kind of 3D environment compared to what your training was prior to that.
Yeah, I definitely, it's still kind of a bit of a learning curve for me with our 3D data. So James, when he was our student worker, focused a lot on it. So he's been a really big help for me to understanding how the 3D data works where we are, because at least from the conferences that I've been to for the other campus technology users, what we do at the U of A is pretty unique in terms of how we store our 3D data, how we present it. So it's definitely a learning curve, and it's hard too, because when you think about how the campus has evolved, we started off with like buildings that came with simple one-line drawings, and now we're on to like, when we finish a project, we get this huge deliverable that has 3D models and extensive amounts of information in the plans. So it's being able to kind of merge both to make this good looking 3D data set. So we've kind of, you know, separated into a few different ways that it can be used. There's an app that our IT made with the GIS data at our department called Interactive Floor Plans. So it's like a traditional 2D view of the campus, but with like a floor elevator, so you can see the floor plans across campus. So that's one set of it, right? So we take the plans and we georeference each floor, and we then have to set the heights of that floor. And sometimes it takes digging, like looking through old record drawings to just determine the distance between floors, which is sometimes like just noted in elevation. So then we kind of have to, you know, calculate it back. So that's one version of what our 3D data does. We've also made a 3D map. I think it's maps.arizona.edu/UA3D or UA3D1. I can't remember. But that's more of like the outside view of these floors that we have stacked on top of each other. It's still just the outside for the most part. We've started experimenting with how to explode each individual floor to look in. We've looked into the ArcGIS indoors, but at this point we've developed our data so like far away from it because it is so new. We've been developing the 3D data for a while, but at this point we think we're just going to move on with how we've been doing it instead of trying to get our data to fit into the ArcGIS indoors model. We'll see how it goes. I don't know, but it is our aim is to get like indoor 3D maps for the university, interactive, and eventually even do routing that involves indoor and outdoor.
Like you mentioned, we've evolved from a 1D to 2D and now even 3D. I'm just curious, how often do you find yourself going back to physical data sets like paper maps or something that you have to refer to or even digitize and use it in what you're doing now?
I think a big part of it has to be, and thanks to Grant and all the work he's done over the last, I think it's been like 25 years, trying to get the Enterprise GIS to the point at which it is. But there are times when there aren't good documents available to digitize. And so it takes a huge amount of like research and collaboration to figure out, oh, this building's floor plan isn't really matching up to the outline, like what's happening, and going back to old documents, georeferencing those. Sometimes we go out into the field with our GPS to then further make sure things are accurate, because it also depends on the project whether or not we get our drawings back into state plane. So sometimes they'll come and snap right in. Sometimes they'll come and be far off and we'll have to georeference them. So it's a balance of everything. And sometimes when they come straight back into state plane, it then causes a snowball effect of us to realize that, oh, some of these features that didn't have that when we digitized them are like off a little. So then it kind of snowballs into going back and fixing other things that didn't have as good of a data standard.
Maree, can you talk about deadlines when you're working on projects? How do you work with them? Are they very strict? Do you get some flexibility when you have to deliver something?
Yeah, so I think it just depends on the project and who the project's for. I think that was something I learned pretty quickly at my old job working for a city government, is if it comes down from the city manager, you drop everything and focus on that. But now it's really about trying to find balance to work on all of these projects with moving targets at once. And I think that was something that took me a while to transition to, because I was really good at school as like a goal-oriented person. I like to have a set deadline where I can work towards and then move on to the next thing. And it just doesn't really work like that. You have like 10 projects going on at once, and you kind of just have to keep rolling with all of them. Sometimes one extends further than you wanted it to because you didn't have time or because the scope of it got larger. So basically it's just about, at the start of each day, kind of taking inventory of being conscious of everything that you're working on, focusing on what needs to get done right away, or focusing on something that I can get done quickly to then make room for other things. So yeah, the deadlines, it's kind of a mixed bag. There are some things with hard deadlines that I put all my energy into for maybe that small time frame, but then kind of have to circle back to the long-term projects.
That's interesting that you mentioned that too. And I think, looking at all of the different types of GIS careers, you can have these kind of extremes, but very common to have the multitasking and keeping track of multiple projects. And one of my first cartography conferences that I went to, I remember going to a presentation with Tim Wallace from New York Times, and they talked about their deadlines. You get a story and they're like, we have 30 minutes to put this up. And they have someone in the field with the GPS telling them, okay, something happened at this corner. I just interviewed someone and here are the GPS coordinates for this corner, and someone's on the phone making a map. And it's just like they're using templates and it has to be out right away, and in your department, it could be a week to a year. You worked on the one project over the past, for a while actually, because you've been designing. So it's interesting to hear, and every project is different, but, as GIS analysts and researchers, we all work on multiple projects and have to, just balance that multitasking. I want to thank you so much for joining us with the podcast. I know that you all are probably busy getting ready for fall and to deploy your web app and everything that you've been working on this past year. So we're looking forward to seeing it. And thank you for joining us again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.